this Zoom channel. So, welcome everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are joining us again this month in the Sampriti hosted the Anita Dialogues. For the first time joiners and the people who are with us here newly, this is a monthly series on Netaji's lead up to 125th birth anniversary that Sampriti München EV, an organization based in Munich, Germany, holds every month. And sharing the screen every month, I have the privilege to present you the illustrious daughter of Netaji, Dr. Anita Pfaff, who has joined me again this month to take us together in this episode of September on the Anita Dialogues.
Namaskar to all of you.
Nice to have you again. And this is the 8th episode we are doing together in this series. We started in February this year, as you might remember. And this is our 8th episode that we have started. Any reflections from your side?
Recording in progress.
I'm very happy that we can commemorate my father's birth anniversary, but particularly today's topic, I think, is maybe not as obvious to some of the participants, but Shaibal Bose, my uncle, was a very, very important person in my father's life. One might say that my father's life and career as a freedom fighter and as a human being would not have been what it was without his brother's influence and the closeness of the two brothers.
Correct. And just for the benefit of the audience, I must say that every month we pick up specific milestones, important milestones in Netaji's life, and have a discussion around that. And that's how it was Dr. Anita Pfaff's suggestion that 6th of September being the birthday of Sarat Chandra Bose, we should pick up the month of September for the discourse on the relationship between Sarat and Subhash Chandra Bose and their larger impact in the Indian context of pre-independence. And this is not a very frequently discussed topic we have seen, and hence I am grateful that we have this discussion happening for the larger audience to get to know more about how Sarat Bose influenced Netaji, and how Netaji and his elder brother played a joint role in the pre-independence context till, of course, he left the scene in 1941. And in that perspective, I think we are also extremely privileged to be joined by someone who has written a whole, who has devoted a significant portion of his life on researching this subject and written a book on it. And it is my, therefore, distinct privilege again to welcome Dr. Gordon here, the acclaimed author of the book, Brothers Against the Raj. Good morning, Professor Gordon. Thank you for...
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And thank you for joining us again from early morning New York, should I say?
Yes, well, mid-morning.
Mid-morning New York. And I think this was this was the topic that was proposed by Dr. Pfaff when you first joined us in the session in February. And you promised that you will come back in August and September again to run this discourse. We had an extremely fascinating session last month discussing about Taihoku and the incidents around that. And this month, I am hopeful that we will have another fascinating discourse on the Bose brothers, or to put it in the lingo of your book, Brothers Against the Raj. Help us understand the context, Professor Gordon, your purpose and the genesis of your devoting such a significant amount of effort and time and research in this subject for the larger audience.
I happened to write my doctoral thesis on nationalism in Bengal, and I had a last two chapters I devoted to the political career of Netaji up to 1940. After I finished that, I was looking for another topic, and I started to work on the partition of Bengal as part of the partition of India in 1947. And as I began to dig into that topic, I realized that the most important Hindu leader of Bengal who opposed the partition, not only of Bengal, but of India, was Sarat Chandra Bose. And I started to investigate further and realized that throughout the political career of Subhas Chandra Bose, his brother was always there. And sometimes when Subhas Bose was unavailable in prison in Europe, Sarat Bose took over. And there's a comment, which may or may not be apocryphal, that Anita must know, that when Subhas Bose was about to have a gallbladder operation in Vienna, he said, "My love to my countrymen, my debts to my brother." And I would add to that, and my political work to my brother. And that's the key thing here for our discussion today, that there was a complementarity, and Sarat Bose was the older brother, but he was a very unusual person in that he didn't seek the limelight. He helped his brother no end, but he never sought office himself. He did get elected to several offices. He was a minister in the interim government in 1946, but he didn't seek the headlines. He didn't go out of his way to be elected to any particular position. He was a very well-rounded human being. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that, if that's okay.
Absolutely. It's all yours.
Yeah. Anyway, I happened a few years ago at the request of the Netaji Research Bureau to give the Sarat Bose lecture in Calcutta. And I'll quote a few things from that, and also from my book, and also from Sarat Bose himself. Sarat was an older brother, but not the oldest brother. Now you realize the Bose family, 14 children. And Sarat was the second son, not the oldest brother. His father saw his talent and favored him. He followed in his father's footsteps in many ways, in his professional, in professional life, in familial responsibilities, in supporting charities, and in his concern for the public good. From early on, Sarat formed a strong tie to one younger sibling. Now, Subhas was the fifth brother. And that tie that Sarat formed early on was to Subhas. But why Subhas? Even Dr. Shishir Bose does not explain this. Maybe Anita has a guess. I have no idea. It is, to me, inexplicable why such ties are formed, why this particular pair out of 14 siblings. Why did they mean so much to each other? It happened that my book is dedicated to two sisters who had a tie, my oldest aunt and her youngest sister, my mother. Why? I don't know. This connection of Sharat and Shubhas started very early and went through every moment of their lives. Although they differed in some things that we know about and others that we might not know about, they displayed remarkable harmony and cooperative effort through almost half a century. This is from my book. But Sharat Bose was called Bose Sahib, while Shubhas was called Shubhas Babu. They were different men, different blends of India and the West, fiercely devoted to each other, who worked together, loved each other, but different. Sharat came to love literature, especially but not exclusively English literature, and had an extraordinary memory which linked to his appreciation of it. He is said to have known plays of Shakespeare by heart and to have recited them standing on the riverside in Orissa. For modern Indians, this is not unique, but we want to sort out the different blending of India and the West for the two brothers. Sharat wanted to learn more of Indian religions in the 1930s, but he had always been a very religious person. Let me Now, why Bose Sahib? Sharat Bose never approached the more thoroughgoing westernization of some of his Indian contemporaries at the Calcutta bar. His lifestyle was a rather eclectic mixture of India and the West, but in his religious life, he was a devout Hindu. It was only in the house that he eventually built for his own family, that is 1 Woodburn Park, that there was what is called a Thakur Gur. He adhered strictly to his faith throughout his life, accepting it entirely, and yet at the same time was an eager reader of works by atheists, such as Bertrand Russell, Leon Trotsky, and George Bernard Shaw. He did not appear to be an intensely conflicted man and could manage within himself traditional Hindu views as well as those of the advanced thinkers of the West. Let me just fill in a little bit of more of the life story of Sharat. He and his older brother were the first of the Bose brothers to go to Presidency College, Calcutta, and they graduated, I think, the two of them in 1905. Then Janakinath Bose, their father, decided that they needed a base in Calcutta, and he acquired 38/2 Elgin Road, which is now called Netaji Bhavan. And this became the base especially for the parents who visited Calcutta from Orissa frequently. Sharat Bose studied English literature, and he got a law degree in Calcutta and began to practice law in Orissa. It is said that another lawyer or judge saw that he had great promise and suggested to his father that he be sent to England to sit for the bar. To practice at the Calcutta bar, you had to be called to the bar in England. That is, you had to graduate from one of the 4 Inns of Court in London. And so it was finally arranged. Janaki decided this was a good idea, even though Sharat was the second son. And just let me add that before he went to England, He had an arranged marriage to Biva, and he also had a son, Ashok. So he was a married man with a son, and he was a little unhappy to leave his wife and child, but he could not forsake this opportunity. So he went off to England, where he spent more than 2 years. And he was a student at Lincoln's Inn. If you want to see the details, you have to go to my book. You can find all the exam questions that he had to answer, et cetera, et cetera. Sarat Bose was not a great test taker. Netaji was an amazing test taker. Sarat was a very intelligent man, a wonderful public speaker, but he wasn't good at exams. And on 2 occasions, when he could have cut short his trip in England, he didn't pass the exams. And at first, people in studying for the bar used to get a tutor, a private tutor, and he didn't want to do that. But then he said, I'll take a private tutor. He got the private tutor, he passed the exam, he was called to the bar, and he came back to Calcutta and started near the top, working with one of the top barristers at the Calcutta, Indian barristers at the Calcutta bar. Now, there are lots of other things about his time in England. We don't have time for that. You can read about that in my book. He went to the theater for the first time. Other things of
I am told
testing
that
out Western culture. So let's go back. Let's go back to India.
Just an interruption here, Professor Gordon,
Go
if
ahead.
I may. I am told that he had promised his mother that he would not take, he would indulge in the Western life, but he promised that he would not take beef and pork while in England. He
adhered to that. He adhered to that, as far as we know.
And there are many letters that he wrote to Bibhavati Devi as well on the life in the West, in London, for that matter, correct? Where we get a glimpse of all those stuff.
Yeah. Now, let me just say that when I started to work on Sarat Bose, all kinds of letters started to appear that nobody had paid any attention to before. And these came from the children of Sarat Bose and from Netaji Research Bureau. And among those letters were the Bengali letters that you mentioned that no one had ever even read, which were sitting in the Netaji Research Bureau, 1912 to 14, letters to Biva in Bengali, which I could not read myself, handwritten. Krishna Bose, her father, Sarat Chandra Chowdhury, and I, the 3 of us, sat together day after day, and we read those Bengali letters, and I transcribed them in English. They were not in good condition. I assume that they are in the Netaji Research Bureau and preserved. Maybe at the end, I'll give my comments about the letters, but those were invaluable for giving a glimpse of Sarat Chandra Bose's life in London during those years. Anyway, he came back. There were several more children born. And let's just turn to Netaji for a second. Subhas Bose was at Presidency College. He got into an altercation with a professor. Several students were very upset by the comments that Professor Oaten had made about Indians. Professor Oaten was beaten on the steps of Presidency College. Subhas Bose was expelled from Presidency College. And then his father used all his ties to get him accepted at another college, and he went to Scottish Church. He was accepted in Scottish Church College, where he studied philosophy, and then in 1919 went to England to sit for the ICS exam. So Subhas also had his English period. So during this period, Sarat Bose is back in Calcutta, building his law career, and establishing his family. And by the 1920s, he was a very high-earning barrister at the bar, very successful, doing all kinds of cases, criminal and civil. And he was known to be a wonderful cross-examiner. And this skill came up later when he was in the Legislative Council and Assembly and Calcutta Corporation, his skill as a questioner. I want to read you one paragraph about the life of the Sarat Bose family. This is from my book. Sarat Bose was an organized person who tried to follow a daily routine which allowed for his professional work, politics, family, and friends. He rose early at 5:30 a.m. or even earlier, took a stroll, usually in the park next to Woodburn Park House, returned to do his daily puja in the Thakur Ghor set aside in his new house for this activity. He saw his children briefly, had tea, was at his desk, filled his morning with legal matters and preparation for court appearances. If he had to attend court, he dressed in a suit, that is a Western suit. Once his court appearance was finished, he changed from suit to dhoti, that is Bengali dress, in his chamber at the court and headed for the Bengal Council, later Legislative Assembly, if there was a meeting, or to the Calcutta Corporation, which he was very active in for many years. He then returned to his desk at home and worked until the evening, when he often attended political meetings. If a very important case came up, he worked on it late into the night. He slept only 4 or 5 hours per night. Walking was his only form of exercise in Calcutta, and later in life, he hired a skilled masseur. He was a methodical man who liked everything in its place and his house immaculate. There are a lot more details about the food, the house, the servants, et cetera, et cetera. Sarat Bose loved to eat. The house served both Western and Indian food. This had a complication later on. Sarat Bose loved sweets, and apparently this was a contributing factor to the diabetes that he had and to his wife's gastrointestinal problems. But they sat at a table and ate Western food at lunch, had Bengali food in the evening. By the time Sarat Bose was well into his career, Shubhas came back from England, had resigned from the ICS, had joined politics. C.R. Das was the leader in Bengal. Sarat Bose in the 1920s was gradually drawn into politics. He said he attended a political demonstration in 1905-6 during the Swadeshi period, not sure. But the 1920s is when he is drawn into politics. It's partly C.R. Das and it's partly the young Shubhas Bose that draws him into politics. He became part of a group of Congress leaders called the Big Five, who were the helpers of C.R. Das, who was the most important political leader of Bengal and one of the most important political leaders of India from about 1917 to his death in 1925. Shubhas became one of the chief lieutenants of C.R. Das. He had all kinds of important roles that he played. And then he became the chief executive officer of the Calcutta Corporation in 1924. Shortly thereafter, he was arrested and put in prison. The government claimed that he was using the funds of the corporation to fund revolutionary activity. Dubious, but a lot of the claims of the government in some of these police reports and government files are, to me, there's no good evidence. People made up things. There were hints of things which were elaborated and exaggerated. Anyway, so Shubhas was off in prison from 1924 to 1927. Now, when I say that Sarat had to pick up the work of Shubhas Bose, What I mean is he became active in politics in ways he had not been before. He ran for the Bengal Legislative Council. Shaibal also became a candidate while he was in prison, and they were both elected. Sarat Bose also, one of the most important things he did from the 1920s on was play a very active role in the Calcutta Corporation. He set out to inform himself on many bread and butter issues having to do with business, water, all kinds of things in the corporation. Shaibal came back. He was released in 1927. So from 1927 to 1931, both Boses were together. Shaibal had to regain his health, which had suffered while he was in prison in Burma. And that they were there together. Now, for many years, Shaibal lived in Sharat's house. Now, one of the Bose family, who was very helpful to me, said Shaibal was a wastrel. He never earned anything. Not quite true. He had a salary as the mayor of Calcutta, chief executive officer, but he depended on Sharat. Sharat supported Shaibal financially. Shaibal lived in his house for many years. And Shaibal also lived from contributions by wealthy Bengalis who supported the Congress efforts, and his efforts in particular. The fact that Shaibal did not have a child until 1942, he became very close to Sharat's children. He was living in that house. Sharat had 8 children, the last born, I think, in 1932, and many of them became close to Shaibal. Ranga Kaku Babu, he was called by the children. So many of them, many of the children of Sharat had a very close tie to Shaibal. And as I said, when I began to do research on this topic, some of them came up with letters, Gita in particular, but others as well. Ashok came up with many letters of Sarat Bose. Now, as I said, I'll get to the problem of the letters at the end, but Gita's letters she had in her own home. I took my little Olivetti typewriter to her house, and I used to type copies of those letters. They're now in the National Library of Calcutta. Ashok had 140 letters, most of them brief, which he gave to me. He said, you cannot give them to the Netaji Research Bureau. I don't want to go into this at the moment, but anyway, I gave them to the Nehru Library in New Delhi. There was no point in my having them, so I gave them to the Nehru Library. So the letters are here and there. There's only one person who can ever gather them together, and that's the other person who's here today, and that's Anita. So I have always wanted a very nice collection of Sharat's letters together, but they're here and there. So from 1927 to 31, we have the non-cooperation movement. Then we have Gandhi going off to England for the second roundtable conference. And then in 1931, both Boses are jailed. And Sharat is in jail from 1931 to 35. Shaibal is out of action in a certain way from 1931 to 1937. And in 1933, Shaibal goes to Europe for health reasons. And then the gallbladder operation that I mentioned to you earlier takes place. He decides to write The Indian Struggle. He needs someone to help him. Emily Schenkel is recommended to him, and she becomes his helper, typist and helper in this enterprise. And in 1934, The Indian Struggle, his account of the Indian national movement is published. Thacker and Spink, I think. Shaibal spends these years touring around Europe, meeting leaders of European countries, learning about European politics, speaking for Indian nationalism. Sharat is in prison. Sharat was not a great writer, but he was a great reader. He read all, and I mean all, of the important Russian novels of Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and Turgenev in prison in the 1930s. He is released in 1935. He had been briefly at his mountain retreat, Kurseong, near Darjeeling, and he comes out, and he, from then forward, from 1935 onward, until he resigned from the Congress in 1947, he becomes a very important leader of the Bengal Provincial Congress Committee. Shaibal comes back from Europe. He's eventually released. Now, there are two important elections in India, 1936-37, 1945-46. Sarat Bose ran both of those election campaigns for the Congress in Bengal. So this is another very important part of his work. And he is elected to the what becomes the Bengal Legislative Assembly in this first election, 36-37, and he becomes the leader of the Congress group and the leader of the opposition in the Bengal Legislative Assembly from 1937 to 41. He apparently, I'm told, we don't have a recording, had a wonderful resonant voice, and he was a wonderful speaker. He said once, I can't get into it. This is a paraphrase. I can't get into it when I'm writing, but when I'm on my feet and begin to speak, the juices begin to flow. It's said that European wives of important officials, when they heard that Sarat Bose was to speak in the assembly, would especially come just to hear him speak, to sum up for the opposition, because he was noted as such a wonderful speaker. Now, this period from 37 to 41 is the other period when the two Boses are there, active in the Bengal Provincial Congress and the Indian National Congress. And as you know, Shaibal is selected to be the Congress president in 1938. We have the Haripura Congress. This is all laid out in my book. And he is the president through 1938. Then in beginning of 39, he said that unless another leftist stepped forward, he would run for Congress president. He runs for Congress president against the wishes of Gandhi. He is elected over Sitaramaya. And then a very bitter conflict ensues. In my book, I use a quote from Gandhi, "We must sail in different boats." Now, I've written a lot in my book about the Boses, about Gandhi. They both supported and opposed Gandhi. It's complicated. Das supported and opposed Gandhi. It's a complicated relationship between the Bengalis and their leaders and Gandhi. Some were what we call 100% Gandhians, some were half Gandhians, some were anti-Gandhians. The Bose's position was, Shaibal Bose said, if he's effective, we support him. If he's not, we have to find other means of struggle. So Gandhi also seems like a gentle, non-violent person, a tough political operator, in my book, who had very strong views in various ways. Executive committees must be homogeneous. There can be many views within the Congress as a whole, but the executive committee, that is the working committee of the Congress, must be homogeneous. So Gandhi, after he lost this election in early 39, his candidate Sitaramaya lost, He didn't say it, but he was determined to break and humble Subhas Bose. Subhas Bose tried, Sharat Bose tried to make some reconciliation with Gandhi, didn't work. Nehru was involved. It's a complicated story that I've laid out there. Anyway, in the end, all the members of the working committee, including Nehru, resigned. Subhas Bose was put in a very difficult position. And eventually, in the spring of 1939, he resigned as Congress president. He was very unhappy to do that, but he felt he had to do it to prevent the splitting of the Congress in some way that would be detrimental to the national struggle. So he suppressed his personal urges to be and happiness in being the president to what he thought was the greater good for the Indian national movement. It's my reading. And he was defeated by a man who was the most skillful politician of India from 1920 to 1950. So Subhas Bose formed what was called the Forward Bloc, which was to be a group within the Congress. And then, as you know, in 1941, he secretly traveled to Afghanistan and then eventually to Germany. Now let's pick up Sarat Chandra Bose. Sarat Bose was the head of the opposition. Now, Sarat Bose had always wanted what was called a coalition government in Bengal. Sarat Bose was the one Hindu leader, foremost Hindu leader, shall we say, who reached out to the Muslims of Bengal. I need to find this quotation from Abul Mansur Ahmad. Abul Mansur Ahmad was a very important leader of the Muslims of Bengal, who I happened to interview on several occasions in 1972 and 1976. In his Bengali memoirs, he wrote, let me quote this paragraph about Sarat Bose. Deshabandhu himself was a devout Hindu, a great Vaishnava devotee. He had unquestionable faith, wholehearted faith in his own religion. His faith was free from any animosity against any other religious sect. On the contrary, his faith was based on universal love, so he had deep respect for the Islamic faith. He was a devout Hindu and at the same time, a great devotee of the ideal of Hindu-Muslim unity and harmony. After Deshabandhu, I found this quality only in one man among the Bengali Hindu leaders, and he was Mr. Sarat Chandra Bose, the elder brother of Subhas Chandra Bose. Sharat Babu, too, was a very devout Hindu. He had faith in pujas and rituals and was ready to make any sacrifice for his faith. Although he was such a devout, confirmed Hindu, Sharat Babu, not for a moment in his life, hesitated to accept wholeheartedly the legitimate political demands of the Muslims and did so without any reservation. So the other crucial theme from, shall we say, 1937 to Sarat Bose's death in 1950 is reaching out to the Muslims. And that's a crucial part of his life story to me. And this led him from 37 to 41 to try to form a coalition government with Muslim leaders, with Fazl Haq and the Krishak Pasha Party in Bengal. And he was about to bring this to fruition in 1941 when he was arrested. Why? Because Subhas was sending messages through the Japanese ambassador in Calcutta to Sarat Bose, and the police knew about this. And I don't know whether Sarat Bose thought this was hidden, unknown, but Sarat Bose was about to become the Home Minister, that is, in charge of security in Bengal. The British would have none of that. Sarat Bose was arrested in December 1941, just after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and on the British in Southeast Asia. And he spent 1941 to 1945 in prison in very uncomfortable circumstances. And the details are laid out in my book. It was a very unhealthy time for him. He had a fever for a good part of this time. Diabetes was there. This broke his health and led to his death at the age of 61. So he did get released from prison in 45, late 45. He led the election campaign in 1945-46 for the Bengal Legislative Assembly. And he was a minister in Nehru's interim government in the fall of 1946. Now, the last part of the story, which in my book I call Extremists Have the Upper Hand, is the story of the partition of Bengal and of India, 1946-47. Sarat Bose did everything he could to oppose this. To oppose this, I need to find, okay. One last quotation. This is from my book by Sarat Bose, March 15th, 1947. By accepting religion as the sole basis for the distribution of provinces, the Congress has cut itself away from its natural moorings and has almost undone the work it has been doing for the last 60 years. The resolution is the result of a defeatist mentality. A sort of fear complex seems to have worked havoc in the minds of many of us. Even if the provinces were to be so divided, Hindus and Muslims will still have to live side by side in them, and the risk of communal conflicts will remain. Remember that. Supposing we divide Bengal and the Punjab on the basis of religion, what about the Muslims in Western Bengal and the Hindus in Eastern Bengal? Or about the Muslims in Eastern Punjab and the Hindus and Sikhs in Western Punjab? The resolution of the Congress, pushed to its logical conclusion, would mean the creation of such religious states or pockets, and the result would be that the risk of armed communal conflicts would increase hundredfold. It would mean pushing India back into the medieval ages. An over-hasty surgical cure will involve us in confusion and disaster. Now, when I said that extremists had the upper hand, after the Great Calcutta killing, the riots in Calcutta in 1946, the more moderate Hindus like Sarat Bose were pushed aside in favor of the people from the Hindu Mahasabha, Shama Prasad Mukherjee. And what Shama Prasad Mukherjee and the Hindu Mahasabha wanted was, even if India is not divided, Punjab and Bengal must be divided into a Hindu state and a Muslim majority state. And eventually, it has worked out that the Hindu majority areas of India, including parts of Bengal and Punjab, become India, and the Muslim majority areas become Pakistan. And Sarat Bose saw that this would not solve the problem of Hindus and Muslims living side by side as they had for hundreds of years in South Asia. And I don't know whether you want to touch on contemporary issues, but look at what's happening in Assam and other parts of India today, where people are said, if they don't have, illiterate people are asked to produce documents documenting that they have been in Assam for more than 50 years of their lives and therefore are citizens of India. Otherwise, they are put in detention camps. I mean, the issue of Hindu and Muslim has not been solved, especially in India. Many of the Hindus, not all, but many, have come to India from the Muslim majority areas. But Sarat Bose was fighting a losing battle. And at various times, it seemed as if Jinnah and Gandhi would support what he was doing. But Gandhi said, unless you have public support, it's a no-go. And in the end, Gandhi, who did not want the partition, had to let Nehru and Patel speak for the Congress and agree to the partition of India in 1947. Shortly thereafter, in 1947, Sarat Bose resigned from the Congress, and he became a critic of the Congress in the last 3 years of his life. He said that he wanted a socialist program for India, and there were all kinds of criticism that he made both of the Constitution of India and of the program of the Congress. He started a newspaper. He was elected to the West Bengal Legislative Assembly. And even on the last day of his life, he wrote an editorial for his paper, The Nation. He died all too early at the age of 61 in 1950. And to me, it seemed necessary to write about the two brothers because they were so complementary in their work, and that vast periods when Subhas, or important periods when Subhas was not there, Sarat was in charge and doing the work of both. So not only for familial and political reasons, but because they had this trust and love for each other, it seemed to me that it was important to write about the two of them in one book, and I tried my best to do that. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. Fascinating, spellbound hearing. Dr. Pfaff, you want to add something from your side? You are on mute.
I cannot add, and I don't want to add to many of the things that Professor Gordon elaborated, because he's so much more into the subject of my uncle's work. Of course, I have only the recollection of a child of my uncle.
Well, we wanted to hear that, whether you do have a recollection, because I've written when you met Sarat Bose.
I met Sarat Bose, and of course, I partly also know him through others who were close to him. As a child, I think I, in a way, experienced him as a different kind of person than his own children and their friends did. Because the surprising thing is, I think he was a very emotional and warm person, even though he was a very sharp mind and a very sharp lawyer, and as such could be quite aggressive and successful in his aggression. But interestingly enough, also his children and his children's friends partly were in awe of him. And they were much sort of more at home and more and closer in a familiar way to my father than to their own father. Maybe that's not so surprising. He had a large family, lived in a large family as a child, and also as a parent. He had 8 children. And I grew up as a single child, but I always got the impression that in very large families, there are 2 things that differ very markedly from the experience of a single child or a smaller family. That is, in essence, the siblings may have conflicts with each other, of course, but they also have very close bonds with each other, and particularly when you have large age differences. Partly the older siblings parent their younger siblings, which of course to some extent was the case between Sarat and Subhas, even though their age difference was not that large. But I think parents also get a bit distant to their own children if there are so many. And so the older siblings, in a way, have to step in. But I sort of experienced my uncle as a very warm individual, even though I could not speak to him at the time because I didn't know any English when I met him. I must say I was not in awe in that sense. I was very thrilled to have an uncle. But I think Lenny touched on that. He was a very exceptional individual. An extremely gifted person who could do a lot, and yet who could also sort of take a step back and let others do things. I think the relationship between the brothers is a typical sign of that. And partly I have a feeling he sort of felt he had to step in when his brother wasn't there or was no longer there. But he wasn't the person to sort of try to ambitiously push everyone else aside. But I think it was more the issues that mattered to him than his own personal benefit and gain in that sense. It is very unfortunate that I think his contribution to India's struggle of independence is not really recognized that much, because I think he did have a very major impact. And of course, it was unfortunate that in the end, as the advocate of unity, Indian unity, he failed, and he could not prevent the partition of Bengal and of India as a whole. Of course, we can only speculate what might have been if he had lived on for many years. He died relatively young. I'm partly, of course, Professor Gordon pointed that out. His time in jail was not very conducive to his health, and I think his lifestyle wasn't either. He liked good food, and being a diabetic is partly, of course, a predisposition, but it's also partly a matter of lifestyle. So he certainly contributed to his own ill health also through his lifestyle of working very hard. You had the report of his sleeping very little and having a very disciplined life, but still burning the candle at both ends. I'm very happy that today we could remember his contribution to India's independence, because certainly if we look at the recognition that the freedom fighters get, I think he's not one of those who really gets full recognition for his contribution.
Absolutely. And I think we have been hearing with rapt attention all the stuff that Professor Gordon you have been sharing, and Dr. Pfaff you have been mentioning as well. And I think it makes such fascinating to listen to something which we are perhaps not following that frequently. But just coming back to this discourse, Professor Gordon, we normally take questions, as you know, as we have these. So there is a question from the audience. I I would like to know if you would have an answer to this. This question is coming from Mr. Tarun Kumar Sarkar in Calcutta. He is asking, I would like to know if there was any rift between them, means the brothers, in their political ideology. Now, do you have any light to throw on that? Have you discovered something of this nature?
Well, it's only by inference. Shaibal Bose seemed to be softer on the use of violent means if nonviolent means don't work. And in 1931, I think, Sarat Bose, 30 or 31, he served as the lawyer for the Chittagong Armory raiders. And he was, it said in the police file that he had given money and he supported revolutionaries. I'm quite dubious of this. And he argued with the governor of Bengal when he was put in prison. He said, everybody deserves a lawyer. That's the British tradition. So I defended these people. Now, I think that Sarat leaned towards legal, nonviolent, constitutional means under most circumstances. Shaibal was a little less devoted to this. Sarat Bose was a man of the law. You know, he, even in his last days, he wrote a critique of the some legal aspects of the Indian Constitution. He was a devotee of what we might call the British Constitution, the British legal tradition. And what he said was the British are not living up to their own constitution, their own laws. So I don't know explicitly. At various points, Netaji said India needs a synthesis of the best aspects of socialism and fascism. Then he backed away from that when Palmdutt challenged him when he visited England in 1938. I don't think Sarat Bose would ever have said that. On the other hand, I'm a great defender of Shaibal as an anti-fascist. And, you know, I think I've written in my book, I had an argument with the person who abridged my book. Shaibal had Jewish friends in Europe, in Vienna, in the 1930s. One of them was called Mrs. Vetter, who ended up living in Connecticut, and I ended up meeting her in Connecticut. And Shaibal said to her in around 1935, 34, 35, I don't think it's safe for you here. I think you should leave. And Mrs. Vetter said, I never said to him that I was Jewish, but he guessed, and he knew the evil that the Nazis were doing, and we left, and she went to Connecticut. I think since Indian independence came first, he submerged any critique he had of Nazism. But I think he was aghast. And the invasion of the Soviet Union made him even more aghast and upset with what Germany was doing. But because he put the colors of Indian freedom first, he went along with some of let's put it this way, he didn't openly criticize some things that the Germans and Japanese were doing. Sarat Bose was not put in that situation, so we don't know.
Yeah. So there is a related question again to this, Professor Gordon. And this is asked by Shumeru Raichaudhuri, who was our panelist last month.
Who knows more than I do.
Yes, but he has a question for you actually. He is asking, would like to know why Sarat Bose did not revive or convert Forward Bloc to a political party and instead launched Socialist Party. Any reflections, any thoughts on that?
Well, Forward Bloc had factions. He was trying to get above factions. And, socialism was his vision. And Forward Bloc was an organization which he did, after he came out of prison, I think he was considered a member, but there were different factions in the Forward Bloc. And Sharat Bose, I think, felt that his aim was to unite the leftists of India, socialists, communists, whoever, together to push the Congress to the left, the Congress of Sardar Patel and G.D. Birla. So I'm not quite sure why he didn't use the term Forward Bloc, but maybe that was one too much associated with Bose's. Socialism is socialism. It's a more, a general kind of name, term, concept. And that's what he was stressing. So I would say that since that was his goal, socialism for India, that's what he called his political organization. And then he brought together leftists from different groupings. I think it was called the United Socialist Conference around 1948. I'm not sure. I'd have to look in my book, but I've written about it. And but here too, leftists in India, riven by factions, communists split 2 ways, 3 ways. He tried his best while he was still alive to bring them together. And he did what he could. So that's my answer.
Thank you. I think with that, we are, I'm looking at the watch here. We are past the hour. So I think we have covered, of course, a lot of ground, especially with respect to your narrative around the entire life of Sarat Bose. And then, of course, Dr. Pfaff's reflections on him. I have a few pictures. I will just use this closing minutes to run these pictures and share with the audience. So I will leave it to both of you, Professor Gordon and Dr. Pfaff. If you have any thoughts on these pictures, I have collected from various sources. So if you have any thoughts on any of these pictures, please feel free to comment as we draw this conversation to a close. By the way, for the audience, this is the book by Dr. Leonard Gordon that we have been discussing, painstaking research. This is the abridged version of the book. I think this was published in 2016, the abridged version, if I'm not wrong, Dr. Gordon.
Something like that. Actually, people don't want to read a book that's more than 600 pages. This is actually, I think, quite a brilliant abridgment by my friend Margaret King, who's a historian of the Italian Renaissance, but a wonderful editor. And I think it's very skillful and much shorter. It comes from Rupa and is available.
And the original unabridged version was published in 1990, if I'm not wrong.
By Penguin India.
Yeah. So that's the book. Of course, this book is available in Amazon. It's called A Definitive Biography of the Bose Brothers. And you have a lot of insights and facts and results of painstaking research. And I will run you past a few of the pictures. Any reflections on any of these, please feel free to comment. And I have deliberately picked up pictures which contain Sarat Bose in all of them, because we have seen a lot around Netaji and the pictures that are popular. But this is from Srinagar, where Sarat, Bibhavati, Prabhavati, and Janakinath Bose. There is also young Shishir Bose standing behind Sarat Bose, as we can see. And we, of course, have the other children of Sarat as well. Anything sounds familiar, please stop me. I will just quickly run this past in the closing minutes of this. This is one of those old, very old photograph. It shows it comes from 1905. I'm not very sure whether this is in Cuttack or whether this is in Calcutta, but this is perhaps the oldest one that I have in this pack. This is Sarat and Bibhavati with her parents. So it was perhaps with the parents of Bibhavati, and there is also her brother, it appears. This is that house in, there's a house in Karshiang in Darjeeling, near Darjeeling.
I have a story about this.
Go ahead, please.
I went there with Shishir and Shumantro and Krishna Bose, and the border police have taken over this house, the Indian border police. And we went to the house. Shishir was too upset to go. Krishna, Shumantro, and I went to the house. We walked in, and the guy pointed a gun at us. And Krishna said to him, "What are you doing? This is my house." Anyway, then she explained, and we were allowed to come in.
Wow. This is from Shillong, 1927, with the father only, I see.
Shubhas looks like a teenager.
Yeah. Even though he was 30, perhaps? Yeah, he was 30.
He was 30.
Yeah. Woodburn Park, this is that house. Incidentally, I do have a number of latest pictures from their ancestral home in Kodalia as well, but I am not showing them because perhaps it is not relevant for today's discussion, but only one sentence. It is very, very, very well preserved, and it really shows the respect that the authorities are showing in preserving the Bose's ancestral home. And I have been there only last month, and I was extremely impressed the way that it was upkept. Perhaps the striking feature of this photo perhaps is Netaji, being the only unmarried person, is standing behind his mother. This is a famous one. I guess we see this photo quite often. Whenever we talk about the Bose brothers, perhaps this is the photo that comes on the surface. I'm not very sure, Professor Gordon, you've seen this and you can tell us, because where is this from? Because Netaji appears to be very frail, and I can only guess that this photo was after some prolonged prison imprisonment.
Yeah. Well, it's either when he came back in 27, but I think more likely 1936, 37.
Okay.
No, I think it must be a bit earlier
what you
than
think,
that.
Anita, what do you think?
I think it must be in the early 30s, because if you look at my father's hairline, in 1938 he had less hair than that, so he was younger. Let me just make one comment on the resemblance of the brothers. In some of the pictures you don't see it, and you feel, well, they don't really look alike, but in their mannerisms, they were very striking. My mother and also my maternal grandmother were totally shaken when they met Sharat because of the resemblance, and it was more the person in action, so to say, who conveyed this this great likeness which they had.
Could be 1934 when Janaki-Nath Bose had died and Subhas came back from Europe and Sharat was briefly allowed out of prison. Could be 1934.
Yeah. Although they both shaved their heads at that time, that must have been just before that then.
This is one of the rare pictures, honestly speaking, a picture with Sarat Bose and Nehru without Subhash, that too before 1941, and that's why I have picked it up.
I haven't seen this. I haven't seen this before.
Yeah, it's quite striking to me, the absence of Netaji in this picture. The Congress Working Committee at the Elgin Road House. Sarat is second from left, Subhash fifth from left. Okay. You talked about the elections that he won, and I think one thing that I recall right now, that even in the last year of his life, he won the South Calcutta election while not actively campaigning. He was in Europe at that point in time. His election managers were managing the campaign, and still sitting in Europe, he could win that election quite easily, the South Calcutta seat that was there.
Well, I think he was forgiven for not being there because he was a very sick man at the time.
Yes, and he was recovering in Europe.
Undergoing treatment in Switzerland.
Yes. This is 1941. This is something that we have seen a number of times. This is the picture of the inauguration of the Mahajati Sadan in 1939. Every time I've seen this picture, this is very recently that I discovered that Sarat Bose is also in this. I have been so negligent to have missed him in the picture earlier, for that matter. But we have seen this picture of Tagore and Netaji so many times, for that matter. This is a very famous picture anyway, and we have mostly seen it.
But that's not Sharat, it's the oldest brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are right. You are right. You talked about the riots post-partition, and I think there are two photos here. One, this is from Noakhali with Gandhiji, and there is one more with Gandhiji in the next one, which is in Sodhpur, both visiting the riot-stricken areas. Imon de Valera, this fascinating story I have read in the book, also how he escaped from the prison, and how they say, or Shishir Bose has written, that they modeled their escape or inspiration, I should say, around Imon de Valera's escape from the Irish prison under British control. And it appears that they had been discussing this escape while they were driving in that Wanderer from Calcutta to Asansol in 1941. So he later became, I think, the Prime Minister of Ireland, and that's when Sarat Bose also met him, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
This is 1948 Naples during the Europe trip that you talked about. I think they visited all these places, including Switzerland. This is in Italy, of course. And this is the last one, very famous picture. And we have someone from the panelists in this shot. So that's all I had. Again, Professor Gordon, thank you. No words to explain. Thank you for the joining, as well as for throwing so much of light on the life of Sarat Bose, which Dr. Pfaff rightfully said needs more attention than perhaps it has got. And you have actually been one of those people who have strived to bring it to the audience's notice. Otherwise, we would not have perhaps known about it. So that's how I think we can call it the end of this month's Anita Dialogues. We come back again next month. And next month is also very special because of the fact that it was in this month, the provincial government of Free India in exile was formed. And we will have another fascinating discussion on that aspect or rather that milestone in Netaji's life when we come back on Sunday, 17th of October at the same time. Till then, I wish you all a very good evening and keep safe health, and see you again next month. Anita Dialogue continues, and we will be back every month like this, commemorating the 125th birth anniversary of Netaji. Thank you, and good evening, everyone.
Jai Hind to all of you.
Jai Hind.